Hello, and welcome to Trusting After Trauma, Season 2, Rebuilding Resiliency After Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Pi Venus Winslow. This informative interview series will provide valuable insights from experts who are dedicated to helping others heal from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse so they can lead joyful, powerful, and fulfilling lives. Many of these professionals specialize in medicine, science, psychology, abuse recovery, personal development, energy work, and much more. I'm very excited to have Teri Wellbrock here with us today. Teri Wellbrock is a trauma warrior, having survived and thrived after learning to cope with her CPTSD symptoms and 25 years of severe panic attacks. By utilizing MDR therapy, personal research, and learned coping skills, along with a foundation of faith and positivity. She is currently writing a book, Unicorn Shadows, From Trauma to Triumph, a healing guide, about her multiple traumas with the intent to help others reach their own joyous and peaceful existence via her story of hope. She also speaks publicly about her triumph over trauma, including recent guest appearances on Healing from Grief and Loss Online Summit and Avaya University's Overcoming PTSD online event. Teri is mom to 3 beautiful children, ages 27, 24, and 14, graduated magna cum laude from the University of Cincinnati with a bachelor's degree in psychology, has written a children's book, The Doodle with the Noodle, with her daughter about their therapy dog, Sammie the Labradoodle, has created the Sammie's Bundle of Hope project, bags filled with trinkets and hope donated to children with trauma history. And she's producer and host of the Healing Place podcast on iTunes, Pandora, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music. She maintains a blog at www.unicornshadows.com and writes a monthly Hope for Healing newsletter. Teri's professional story includes sales, managing, teaching, and case management with a mental health agency. Her life purpose is to make a positive difference in the lives of others and shine a light of hope into dark places. Welcome, Teri. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I just heard that bio and I was like, wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Yes,
I should have written that down for you.
Well, it is a lot of stuff. And obviously, I mean, you do a lot of things, like all these things you're doing. And this is your passion, right? Because
Yes.
You've been through the trenches, you have been through the battlefield. So tell us about your personal trauma story.
Absolutely. Yes, I call it, yes, I have a degree in psychology, but really I have street cred when it comes to trauma because of my trauma history. So for those unfamiliar with ACEs, it's adverse childhood experiences, and ACEs have kind of exploded onto the mental health scene. And my ACEs score is 8 out of 10 in the black and white world and a 10 out of 10 in the gray world. And I'll explain that in a second. So I'll just quickly go through my trauma history. And for those who might be triggered, just know I'm just going to mention some things that could be triggering. When I was 4 years old, an intoxicated parent attempted to drown me and my 1-year-old sister in a bathtub. When I was 5, I was sexually molested by a 16-year-old neighbor. When I was 9, I was sexually molested by a 19-year-old neighbor. When I was 10, I was repeatedly molested by my choir director. Also during those first 10 years of my life, my dad was physically abusive as his mental health started to diminish with my mom's addiction. And but when I was 10, he sought counseling. And I remember him bringing me into his room. My parents slept in separate bedrooms and sat me on his lap and said, Teri, I've been talking to a counselor, as you know, and I now realize I was hitting you out of anger. And I never should have done that. And I will never hit you again. And I'm so sorry. And he never hit me again. And then when I was 14, I was sexually accosted by a religious education director in the rectory where I worked in the evenings for the priests answering phones. When I was 16, I lost my virginity to date rape. Later that same year, I was attacked by a gang of youth downtown Cincinnati. And when I was 17, an officer involved in that investigation asked my parents if he could take me to dinner. However, he did not take me to dinner to celebrate the convictions of that gang attack. He took me back to his apartment where he attempted to rape me. When I was 21, I was involved in a bank robbery where a gun was held to my head and my coworker was stabbed 3 times with a hunting knife. They did not catch those assailants. I moved to our main office of the bank, and 3 months later, those same assailants would return to the main office where I had just moved. Only this time they would pull the trigger and murder my coworker. I had run from the back of the bank and came face to face with an armed assailant who pointed his Luger at me, but the gun misfired and my life was yet again spared. My trauma history.
Wow, Teri, that is really, really intense.
Yeah.
Really intense. Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
And
Well, and thanks for allowing me the voice to share it. And because I had soon after that second robbery, severe panic attacks started to kick in. And for the next 25 years, I spent my life battling these panic attacks and thinking I was forever broken because of all of this that had happened to me. Um, and I had a point for going down that road, and now I forget what it was. But yeah, it was just to say thank you for allowing me to in honoring my story.
yeah, yeah, I absolutely thank you for sharing. And so like you said, these, all of these experiences shape who you are. And and so like you're a different person now than you were, before, after having those experiences. Like, let's talk about how you mentioned a little bit how those experiences affected you. You mentioned panic attacks. Like, what else were you really struggling with because of what you experienced in your life? Like, where were you at when you realized, oh my gosh, like I've got to do something to heal and recover and change my life?
Yes, absolutely. So I obviously was experiencing generalized anxiety, constantly living in a state of hyperarousal, which we now understand from those who have experienced trauma and ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences. There is a state of I was constantly on alert. I couldn't go to stadiums and sit if there were people behind me. I had to be on the end row so that I had an easy escape. I was always scanning, looking for my escape. And it was just a constant state of fear and always anxious. Um, and I found myself in 2013. I decided I'd had enough, and I went to a therapist's office and I had this list of 5 things. And number one on the list was a toxic friendship in this person that I had been drawn to, this narcissist, and was very controlling of me and dictating, and I allowed it to happen. But I also now know that those who experience trauma can be very drawn to narcissists, and that narcissists prey upon those who are vulnerable and weak. And so here I was in this. So that was number one on the list. And then number two, I had a teenage son. And so um, I was just concerned about my relationship with him, and he was 15, and we were having some difficulties. Great kid, but just having some issues. And then number three, I was in the middle of a divorce. And then number four, I can't even remember what number four was, but there at the bottom, number five, my trauma history. To me, I had become so used to it's just part of me. I think I'll mention it to the therapist. It was just, I just thought it was something I could never fix.
Hmm.
And I was just going to have to be broken forever.
Hmm.
Yeah. And people would say to me, Teri, you radiate so much joy. Like, how did you get through all of this? And I used to say, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I don't know. Well, now I understand because of ACEs science, resilience. And I realized I had a high resilience score. I had a grandmother in my life that was incredibly loving and just this ray of light in my life. I had my best friend's parents called me their adopted daughter. I spent a lot of time at her house and in the normality, the normalcy of her life, where my life was so chaotic. Um, and so it helped me build my resilience. I had a teacher that was very, very involved in my life. And just the attention that she gave me, again, helped me build that resilience, and survive all that I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so tell us more about ACEs and what it is and what it means when you talk about resiliency and resiliency score for people who are not familiar with it.
Absolutely. So ACEs is, again, the adverse childhood experiences. There was a study conducted, and 10 questions basically. Now, since they've since added to it bullying, racism, but the original 10, um, I guess, areas to look at were poverty, sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, addiction in the household, parents who were separated, divorced. Um, there was neglect, which was another factor that I had experienced as well. But those, I can't remember what the other ones are right now. But if you look, I think there's ACEs Too High is a site you can go to and do the questions and figure out your ACE score, because what ACEs determines, um, is that if you look and you have, oh yeah, I have one of those, you, the chances of you developing some later down the road into adulthood mental health or physical, such as cancer, heart disease, diabetes, can increase. It's when you hit that 4 number of having 4 of those things,
Mm-hmm.
that things just start to jump dramatically. Suicide rates go up. Yeah, chances for developing heart disease and again, these physical ailments really jump up. And so the whole idea of ACEs and looking at them is what's going on in these kids' lives, or what has gone on in these adult lives in their past, so that we can really help process a lot of this unresolved trauma. Because as kids, I didn't know how to process this trauma. It was all just trapped in me.
Mm-hmm.
And hence the panic attacks. It
Mm-hmm.
was, I like to think of it as this horrific negative energy that was trying to find a way out,
Mm-hmm.
because I had never processed it properly. Um, so yes, when I finally ended up in therapy, and this therapist was wonderful and said, Terry, I think we've really reached what we can do here. Have you ever considered EMDR therapy? And that's how I got directed to EMDR. But back to your question. So resilience, is the other half of ACEs. So you look at, oh my gosh, this horrible stuff that's happened in someone's life, but resilience is that hope part of it.
Mm-hmm.
What things did you have in your life that helped you? Because some people can go through horrible stuff and come out okay,
Mm-hmm.
where others struggle. Because if you have that one caring adult in your life, a coach, a teacher, a grandparent, whomever that may be,
Mm-hmm.
what a powerful impact that can have on a child's life,
Mm-hmm.
truly. Um, and so that resilience part of it really helps offset, that ACEs score. So
Mm-hmm.
there you
Yeah. So how would you say, what coping through your recovery process and your process of discovering more about yourself, what did you discover that your coping mechanisms or your coping skills that you had to survive everything that you had been through? What did you learn about yourself that the patterns that you had of dealing with things that came up, situations, people, your own habits, triggers, all of those things? What did you learn about yourself in that process that you realized wasn't actually working for you anymore.
Yes. Avoidance became a really big issue. I started avoiding driving on bridges and highways. I started avoiding leaving the house. I became agoraphobic for a while. I was terrified to leave the house. I had bizarre, which I now understand aren't that bizarre, phobias come up of falling off the earth, of being in a wide open space and feeling as if I was just going to fall off the earth. And but again, it was this unresolved trauma and a horrible fear
Mhm,
related to being trapped in an open space, which was that second bank robbery when I was trapped behind that house with that armed assailant.
mhm,
And so again, I avoidance behaviors. I was also, when I ended up in EMDR, for the first time, I heard the word dissociation. And she was talking to me about how I dissociated. Because when we would return to, for those who aren't sure what EMDR is, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so I would hold paddles in my hand that would go like vibrate, zzz, 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 left, right, left, right. And by doing so, my eyes would go back and forth, similar to how when we're in REM sleep and we dream,
mhm,
we process our day's events. So sometimes we wake up and we're like, why did I dream about a giant tomato chasing me down the street? Well, something had happened with a tomato earlier. Maybe somebody mentioned food poisoning. And then, so your brain says, oh my gosh, well, we have to get rid of that. And we dream about it and it's done, it's over. Um, so in EMDR, I would go back into my traumas. And we did this for 4 years and went back in slow, but slowly, slowly. And every time we went back, it was as if I was watching a movie and I was watching something happen to this little girl. It
mhm,
wasn't looking through my own eyes, but and that was my dissociation. I would move outside of myself to survive,
mhm,
and see it happening. Yeah, to somebody that wasn't me.
mhm.
And then I knew the day that I had truly turned a corner and started to heal, and we had gone back into that second robbery. And my therapist would always, stop and say, "What's happening?" And I was just sobbing. And she's, "What's going on? You're safe." She would walk through the grounding parts. Your feet are on the ground. You're in my office. And what's happening? And I said, for the first time, when I turned my head, when I went back into it, I was looking through my eyes. And that was incredibly powerful because I was finally able to be back in my own body
Mhm,
while going back into a trauma, and
mhm.
able to be with the sensations and be with the discomfort and be with the scary thoughts and the scary feelings. Incredibly powerful healing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So these stories that you're sharing with us and that the stories you shared with your therapist, when we do share our stories, there's a release that we can experience. And but also in sharing our stories, we have an opportunity to bond with other people, right? And
Yeah.
so how has this journey that you've been on of sharing your story and everything that you've been through impacted your own healing journey, and how has it helped other people heal?
Yeah. So I was invited to speak at an event downtown Cincinnati. Someone had heard my story and it was invited to the National Crime Victims' Rights Week Awareness. It was some incredibly long name. And so the mayor was there and news stations, and it was this big event. And it was my first time standing on a stage and talking and telling my story. And when I looked out into the audience, into the people that were sitting there, and I saw heads shaking and in agreement, and I saw tears streaming down people's faces, and I thought, this is really resonating. And my sons were there and they both had tears coming down their cheeks, and it was just a very powerful moment for me because I thought to myself, oh, so sharing our truths and sharing this, it helps create these soul connections, and the people can step up and say, oh my gosh, me too.
Mhm,
Well, soon after that, I had an opportunity to start a podcast with a therapist friend. she and I only did a couple episodes together, and it was goofy and silly, and we talked about angels and God and aliens, and it was fun. And then she had to step away because she got another job, and so she stepped away. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to continue on with this, but really take it in a different direction and start to bring on some people to talk about this stuff and to talk about their stories of overcoming and their survival, but then also experts to talk about, you know, what can we do to heal, and what is this hope thing, and how do we get a hold of it, um, and it just blossomed into this beautiful, beautiful place of hope and healing. And so, yeah, I just think finding or telling our stories helps us find um, others who have maybe survived something similar, and we can learn from one another on how to build our resilience and how to not give up and how to keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love you mentioning soul connections and how it and how it helps, like when we can see ourselves in other people, we can have compassion for them, but it also helps us have compassion for ourselves, right?
Yeah,
So you know, and this kind of ties into why the I get it and me too connection is so powerful.
yeah, for sure. I mean, gosh, hashtag me too just went, you know, look at what happened
Mhm.
when women started stepping up and saying, yes, this happened to me as well. And I love it that it became so much not about, you know, naming names and pointing fingers, but it was more about empowerment in finding our power, um, by saying, yes, this did happen to me, but look at me, I'm strong, I'm resilient, I survived this, and by sharing this, I'm going to help other people also stand up and say, you know, I survived it too. And you're right, I am strong.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that it is hard to talk about our stories, and it is scary. There's you know, there's a lot of feelings that come up. There's you know, there a lot of people find it hard to talk about things that have happened to them because they feel shame. And so can you explain, like, can you talk a little bit about that and how it's beneficial to learn how to overcome those barriers, like whatever is stopping you from speaking up and sharing your story, whether it's shame or fear or um, you know, whatever might be coming up, but it, like, exposing our vulnerabilities, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with others. Explain how people can do that.
Absolutely. And it's so critical and so key because I say it so often that you really do have to go back into the darkness. If you haven't processed the trauma, you have to go back into the darkness to get into the light. And it's scary. And it really can be scary. I remember leaving my EMDR sessions, crying my eyes out, but every time I felt a little more healed, a little more hopeful because I knew I had just gotten rid of a little bit more of it and put it where it needed to be and processed it. So yeah, that shame part of it, I didn't tell anybody about anything that had happened to me until I was in my 30s, and then really started to put it out in my 40s and sharing it on Facebook. I mean, I just started to share some of it and say this is part of my story and what had happened. And I started to receive private messages and texts and phone calls, and people would pull me aside in the parking lot at school and say, oh my gosh, I've never told anyone before. Thank you for your courage. You know, I was raped in college, or I had this horribly abusive alcoholic father, and they started sharing their stories with me because they knew by me putting my truth out there that I was a safe place for them to share theirs. And
Mhm.
that's what I think is huge, is that if we can start to honor one another's stories and realize, you know, so many of us have been through something.
Mhm.
And just to honor that in each other is incredibly, incredibly empowering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my goodness, Teri, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. So before we wrap up, is there if you if there were three things that you really wanted viewers who are watching this interview, this conversation that we're having today, people who have experienced trauma, people who are struggling with trusting themselves, trusting other people, people who are recovering from narcissistic abuse, which is a, like that's a big umbrella for all kinds of other abuse, physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, all of that. What three things do you really want people to take away from this conversation today?
Um, Probably one of the biggest things is one of my favorite hashtag, which is hashtag never give up. Because again, and I think and it wasn't, I don't know if it was before we hit record that we talked about this, but um, yeah, when you, I'm drawing a blank. I just went, foop, out the window. Call it menopause brain. It happens from time to time.
It totally does. It totally does.
Oh my gosh. So never giving up is huge. I thought this was what it was. I thought I was broken forever. I just thought that this horrible stuff had happened to me, and that was just the way it was. But now I understand through research and just reading everything I can get my hands on. You see this stack of books behind me. A lot of those are from podcast guests, who are experts in the field, and they brain plasticity. Oh my gosh, I read everything I could get my hands on brain plasticity, and understanding that by changing habitual patterns, that we can then change the way our brain is firing, the neuron pathways. Like, we really can rewire our brains. And so I'm no longer experiencing panic attacks. I don't have them anymore. Yes, I have heightened anxiety, but I also have grounding tools in place. I've built this huge toolbox of coping skills, from mindfulness exercises to yoga, meditation, taking nature walks, breathing exercises. I mean, there's just, again, this huge collection of coping skills that I utilize if I feel I'm being triggered, if I feel some anxiety increasing. I'm ready to take a trip, and I'm not comfortable being far from home. My home is my safe space. I call this my sacred writing space. I'm surrounded by all the things that I love, and I've made this a sacred space for myself, which is another coping skill.
Mhm.
And so when I veer further from that safe space, I can feel my anxiety start to rise. But I also then practice mindfulness and look at all the beauty that surrounds me in that moment, and very much center on being in the now. And it's a beautiful practice. So that was probably about 5 things that I threw in there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was. And, but there are so many things that, to take away from these conversations. I mean, learning about brain plasticity, learning that we can change the way our brains work, practices to help us calm our system, practices to help us get back in touch with our bodies, and our breath, grounding practices, building up your toolbox, getting more information, educating yourself. And that's part of why I love doing this series, is because I get to bring in all kinds of people who have all kinds of tools and resources to offer our viewers. And so it's all part of the process. And, some
Yeah.
things work really well for certain people and other things work really well for other people. We're all unique snowflakes.
Yes.
And this is our journey, right? This is what we're here. We're here to learn about who we are and what we have to bring to the world and what works for us, and to share that beauty and that joy and the resilience in our stories with the world.
Yes. Beautifully said. And I agree. Amen.
Yes, yes. And you have some resources. You have a gift to share, some tools to share with our audience today. Would you
I
tell us
do.
about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I created more for myself, but then friends started to say, Terry, can you send me a copy of that? And so then I thought, well, I'm going to put this on my website and offer this as a download, free download for people because it's helped me so much. So it's a coping guide for panic attack and anxiety, free to download. And it's filled with what I just said, my toolbox. And I need to add to it. Really do need to add because my toolbox seems to grow every day. But it's things like Ho'oponopono Hawaiian healing, which was introduced to me by an EFT therapist, which is tapping. I don't know if you're familiar with the tapping, but
Yes.
so had introduced me to this Ho'oponopono, and oh my gosh, I use it every day. As a matter of fact, I was just looking at someone's picture and I was using it, and it's again a very grounding, very forgiving. It brings forgiveness, and um, yeah, it's a wonderful practice. But so that, and I talk about the breathing techniques that I've utilized because there's more than one way to breathe
Mhm.
when you're trying to ground yourself. But I do love what you just said, is that something like this where there's a whole list of different things you can try, you can pick and choose. Like, oh yeah, that really doesn't work for me. Oh yeah, that one's really good, that works. Breathing, I couldn't do breathing for a long time. My therapist would say just breathe, and I was too terrified to be in my own body, and bringing attention to my breath
Mhm.
was brought attention to the fact, like, oh my gosh, I'm inside of myself, and inside of this is a lot of panic and chaos. And
Mhm.
so until I could learn to re-regulate and calm that, then I could do the breathing techniques. So yeah,
Yeah. Yes, that's amazing. Thank you so much for such a generous gift to our viewers.
absolutely.
And thank you for sharing your time and your story and your experience with us. It's been a pleasure to have you here, Terry.
Oh my gosh, it's been such an honor. I feel honored to be here, and thank you again for allowing me to share my story and yeah, my insights on trauma and trauma recovery.
Yeah, you're an inspiration and an example to all of us that it is possible to rebuild resiliency after narcissistic abuse, after childhood trauma, after any kind of experience that has caused us distress and learn coping skills that no longer work for us. So
Yes,
it,
absolutely.
it's totally possible to change, and you're a shining example of that, Terry. So thank you
Oh,
for
thank you.
sharing your
Yeah.
story with us. All right, so thank you everybody for joining us for Trusting After Trauma Season 2, Rebuilding Resiliency After Narcissistic Abuse. And I want to encourage you to download Terry's free gift and remember to keep checking your emails so you don't miss out on any of the amazing interviews in this series. We're going to continue to keep exploring with our many experts on how we can rebuild resiliency after narcissistic abuse and heal our body, mind, and spirit to live joyful and authentic lives. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye.